Good to have you back. This is our fifth session. We've done four different looks at the Old Testament, and what we've been trying to think about most of the way through here is how you go from creation, where everything is good and perfect, but man gets worse and worse and worse, and until finally you get to the cross. And we've talked about all the different things that go on, and there's lots of different heroes where God would make some sort of a promise. Here's what I'm going to do, and then it would go south. Or here's what I'm going to do, and all the people would have their plans, and God would have to kind of bring them over to where he was at. And we saw that with Moses, and we saw that with Adam and Eve, and certainly Noah's Ark is a story about that, where God has one plan, but man's going the other direction. Today's story is about Ruth, and it's a very short little book. If you go through your Old Testament, there's the first 5 books are books that we know Moses wrote, and Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And then there's these 3 books in a row that kind of are the era between Moses, who was a big deal in Jewish history, and David, who's also a great big deal in Jewish history. And so you got these 3 books in the middle, Joshua and Judges and Ruth. There's actually a Lyle Lovett album called Joshua, Judges, Ruth, about a man who gets mad at his wife, but it's a whole different thing. Anyway, Ruth is a very small book at the end of all that, just 4 chapters, and the whole point of Ruth is talking about, well, there's 2 or 3 points, but I'm sure it's in there partly because it shows how King David came to be, because Ruth is a great grandmother. Ruth is also mentioned in the lineage of Jesus there in Matthew 1:5. She's a pretty important character in terms of the Old Testament, and she's one of the few people who have a whole book just devoted to her and to her story. There's a lot of stuff in there, but the big thing that you're going to come across is this word here. Now, I can't read Hebrew, and I'm guessing that most of you guys who are watching can't read Hebrew either, but the word roughly there in English is this word hesed, and it means kindness. Sometimes it can translate and mean mercy or compassion. Normally, it's a word that is tied to God. There's a loyalty component. Hebrew, compared to English, a lot of the words mean more than one thing. It's a smaller language. There's only, I think, 8,000 or 9,000 words in Hebrew, where English has 26,000 or 7,000 words. And so a lot of the Hebrew words mean more than one thing. And hesed is a great big word. It talks about God's enduring loving kindness to us. God's, most of the time in the Bible where it's used about God. God's kindness for us and how God uses his kindness. But in the book of Ruth, it pops up several times. And some of those times it's referring to her and how she's an example of that. And like I said, she's a forerunner, literally, of Jesus. She's one of his ancestors, but she's certainly a forerunner also metaphorically of Jesus, and so is Boaz, who we're going to meet in this book. And they both show this aspect of loving kindness and how God is to us. We see that in the book of Ruth, and hopefully I can bring that out as we go through it. There's a lot of slides, but the story moves pretty fast, so hopefully I can get through all of it without too much trouble. All right, here we go. In those days, it says, when the judges ruled. And like I said, we're talking with Joshua and Judges and Ruth. Those books are right there. And Judges were guys, if you're kind of familiar with your Bible, guys like Gideon. Samson is a very famous judge. A lot of the judges had their own moral problems. And it says a couple of places in the book of Judges that there was a time where there was no king, and everybody pretty much did whatever they wanted. So Israel is kind of in a real murky moral area during this stretch. And in those days, when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and his 2 sons, they went to live for a while in the country of Moab. If this is a map of Israel, Jerusalem in the middle there, Moab is a country down into here. It's like down by the Dead Sea. And so they went to Moab and they settled there, which, strictly speaking, they weren't supposed to do. I mean, God gave that area of Israel for them to keep, and they weren't supposed to ever leave it, but he does. And so you could read that as a faithless kind of moment for the man. It says his name was Elimelech, and all of the names are important here. Elimelech means my God is king. And the man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi, which means beautiful or pleasant. And the names of the 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, which means sickly and spent. So it's unlikely, actually, if that was their real names. It's probable that whoever wrote the book of Ruth, that's just what he's calling them, sickly and spent. I can't believe anybody would have a kid and name him sickly, but they might have. Who knows? And it's foreshadowing in any event, whether it was intentional or not, because, well, you'll see here in a second. And they went to live there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons, and they both married Moabite women. One of them married Orpah, and we don't know a lot about her. And the other married Ruth, and we'll find out a lot about her. And after they had lived there about 10 years, both sickly and spent, also died, which makes sense if you think about it. And Naomi was left without her 2 sons and without her husband. And in that time period, you're a life destined for poverty. That's what it was. I mean, there wouldn't be any trade skill that she could do. Women weren't trusted to do those sorts of things, and they wouldn't have been endorsed by the culture at large. Normally, in a situation like this, she would go back to live with her parents, but in all likelihood, her parents are already gone. If she had sons, they could take care of her, but both of her sons died. There's just nothing. I mean, she's going to have a life of poverty and a life of begging. That's what her life is going to be. And so she says, knowing that, right? She says to her 2 daughters-in-law, well, you need to go back, you two, to your mother's home. And probably, that's kind of a weird phrasing, but probably contrasting that person to Naomi. Instead of staying with me, a poor widow, you need to go back to your mother. I'm not your mother. You go back to your mother. May the Lord show you kindness. And it's that word hesed. May the Lord show you loyalty, you know. So Naomi clearly loves these 2 women. It's not that she's trying to get rid of them because she doesn't like them. She clearly loves them. She's praying that God will do great things to her. May the Lord, she says here at the end, may the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. It's just a brutal time for women. And so Naomi's saying, I'm going to go live a life of poverty the rest of my life, but you're both young women. And you could find another husband, and you don't have to be destined to the same life that I'm destined to. It really is a selfless move on her part. Well, they all, 3 of them, cried about it. I mean, they're all very close. They all had a great family there together. And the 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, they said, well, we'll go back with you to your people. But Naomi said, return home, my daughters. Am I going to have any more sons? Goodbye. Now, there's more to it than that. These ellipses here that I did, I'm trying to let you know that I took some liberties to kind of make it shorter. But that's the gist of her argument. It's too late. And this argument about having more sons, there was a rule in that time period, a levirate law, and it kind of had to do with widows and that sort of thing. But if a person died, well, then somebody like his brother would come and marry the dead man's wife, and so he would be responsible for that person. So if a man had 3 brothers and the first one died, there's a story like that actually in Genesis 38. If a man died and had more than one son, the second son would marry that wife. But here's the hitch of that. Any children from that woman that the second son has taken in, they actually legally belong to the first. It's kind of complicated, but they belong to the dead son, and they belong to his line. The Genesis 38 story, which is kind of R-rated, if you want to, for those of you who are into Bible R-rated stories, you can look at it later. In that story, the first guy dies young, and so the father gives this daughter-in-law to his second son, and the second son wants no part of it, and it's all because of the inheritance stuff. With the first son out of the way, the second son stands to inherit a lot, unless the first son has a son. Now, he doesn't yet, but if the second son takes this woman in and has a son with her, then all the inheritance would go to that person. So to save his own inheritance, the second son cheats and tries to sneak around and get around God. And so all of this was, I mean, it sounds messy and awful and it would make for some interesting family reunions, but the whole agenda of it was to take care of women in a world where really women usually didn't get taken care of. And I know it's awkward and kind of ham-fisted way to get that done, but that was the gist of it. And so that woman would have a son, that woman could get the inheritance, that was the thinking. And so she's saying, I can't have any more sons. And even if I could, I mean, it would be years before they would be old enough to, you can't wait that long. And so Orpah gets it, and she says, well, you're right. I mean, you're right. And they all cried. I mean, it never condemns her, Orpah, like she made a bad decision. In fact, she kind of makes a smart decision. And it's not really, there's no wickedness to it. I mean, there's no wickedness to it. The story doesn't condemn her for doing what she did. It makes sense, you know. But what Ruth does is better, and it's better because it's unexpected. Ruth just as easily could have went back, but it says Ruth clung to her, and this word cling. If you look back at Genesis 2, I wrote this one down actually. Genesis 2:24. There's a deal where it talks about a man will leave his father and mother and cling to his wife. They'll become one flesh. It's the same word here. This cling. It's the same Hebrew word. And so what Ruth is saying is to Naomi is, you've been such a good mother to me that I'm tied to you, and I can't just break that. I mean, I don't know what Naomi had done, or I don't, you know, but we've committed to one another. And so Ruth says, and this is probably the most famous verses in the book. She says, wherever you go, I'll go, and where you stay, I'll stay, and your people will be my people, and your God, my God. And where you die, I'll die, and there I'll be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. What Ruth is agreeing to here is, I'll go be poor. I'll go be hopeless. I'll go to the bottom. And not just that. Part of the reason why Naomi is headed back home is because at least at home she'll be surrounded by people who are from her family or who connected to her racially. They'll all be the same, and there's some. Naomi is all by herself in a weird area, and to go back is going to open all those doors again. What Ruth is saying is, well, I'll go with you. So Ruth is actually going to take the harder slice here. Not only is Ruth going to be poor, but she's going to let Ruth is going to become the alien. Ruth is going to become the one who everybody looks at suspiciously, and Ruth is going to have to live with it longer. Naomi is going to die, and Ruth is still going to be alive, and she's still going to be poor, and she's still going to be an alien, and that's what she's signing up for. So when you think about that hesed, that loyalty here that Ruth is showing, I committed. I committed to you, and just because it's easier and just because it's smarter, Ruth says, I'm not going to do it. I mean, this whole section's awesome. It's just I just refuse to anything but to stay loyal like I should. It's an example, and it'd be a great memory verse. It's Ruth 1:16 and 17, just fantastic stuff. Well, it says, so they went on. The two women went on, and they came to Bethlehem. And when they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred up. And they said, can this be Naomi? Don't call me Naomi. Remember, Naomi means beauty or beautiful. Don't call me Naomi, she says. Call me Mara, which means bitter. Because the Almighty has made my life bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord's afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune. So you could do a whole thought process here, and maybe you've been in a dark hole like this too, but we've all known people who get in these holes. Everything is dark. I've had so many things go wrong, and she had. I mean, it's just brutal, all the stuff that she's been through, and she's confident that God is against her. The reason why all these things happen is because God's against me. God's trying to get me. God's trying to punish me. And maybe she felt guilty because they left Israel. Maybe she felt guilty because her sons married Moabite women, which you weren't supposed to do. I don't know, but she's confident that everything in her life is punishment. And so if you've ever felt like that, or if you ever have to talk to someone and try to encourage them who's felt like that, Ruth can be a great study to look at, because I think you're going to see in the rest of the book that God really is working for Naomi, even though she doesn't see it. It says she had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the same clan as Elimelech, the same clan as her husband, and his name was Boaz. And Boaz is kind of a unique name. It's the only guy in the Bible we read who has that name. And Ruth said to the Moabite, said to Naomi, let me go to the fields. and I'll pick up whatever leftover grain I can find in whoever's eyes I find favor. It's an idea of gleaning, and it pops up in Deuteronomy, and I wrote this one down too. I know I forget. Wrong place. Leviticus. It's in Leviticus. That's why I wrote it down. Leviticus 19. Oh, it's the same general area where it talks about loving your neighbor as yourself. Leviticus 19. 6 through 10 has a whole section there about farmers were supposed to leave a little extra in the field. Don't go back and pick the grapes twice. Don't go back and re-go over your fields. Leave a little bit there so the poor have something to eat. And so Ruth says, well, I'll go do it. And there's an obvious question here. Well, why isn't Naomi going out there too? And she's just depressed, probably. Almost certainly. She doesn't have any energy for it. So Ruth is not only going to go back, but Ruth's going to shoulder all the load for taking care. Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. And she went out, and she entered a field, and she began to glean behind the harvesters. And as it turned out, she was working in that field that Boaz owned. That's the same person who's a relative of the husband Elimelech. As it turned out, the actual literal says, chanced upon that field. It uses the noun chance as a noun and a verb. Chanced to put her in that spot, and it's like it's just one of those random things. But the guy who's getting credit for it subtly, and really not even that subtly, is God. God's orchestrating. And Ruth could have went anywhere, but it just turned out she was working in this field of Boaz. And Boaz sees Ruth and says, daughter, listen to me. Don't go, and probably says this because he's older than her. We don't know how much older. Probably quite a bit older than her. Boaz says to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. And watch the field where the men are harvesting, and you follow along after the women. I've told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you're thirsty, go get a drink from the water jars that the men have filled. Back on this first verse, you could read this as if she is starting to walk away when he talks to her, right? The reason why he says don't go away is because she was starting to go away. And the reason why he says I've told the men not to lay a hand on you is because they had been. Maybe they'd been whistling at her or saying things they shouldn't have. I mean, she's a foreigner. She has no rights there at all, no legal rights at all, and a young woman, and so maybe the men had been kind of saying things. Maybe they'd even tried to be touching her, and so she's starting to leave, and Boaz says, don't leave. I've told the guys not to touch you, and they won't. And more than that, he says, you can go drink from their jars. If you start working and get thirsty, you go drink from their jars. And at this, Ruth bows down with her face to the ground and asked him, have I found such favor in your eyes that you'd notice me? I'm a foreigner. And Boaz replied, I've been told all about what you did for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you didn't know before. He says, may the Lord, he's talking to her, may the Lord repay you for what you've done. And may you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you come to take refuge. The idea of the wings, it could refer to like wings, like a bird's wings, but normally that idea was like your coat, like your big overcoat. And if it was somebody, the same way you would maybe give your coat to someone who was cold, or that you'd put your arm around somebody who's cold, kind of has that same reference here. You kind of put the corner of your coat over the top of them there, and under whose wings. In Malachi, it talks about how the Messiah, when he came, would have healing in his wings. And again, it's in his cloak. The legends about the Messiah was that just touching his clothes would heal you, and there actually is a story about that in the New Testament where a woman touches Jesus' clothes and is healed immediately. That coming under his wings, under his cloak, it's like and so anyway, that's what he's praying for. He says, I pray that the Lord will take you under his wings. You've come to seek refuge there. And so she says, may I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord. You've put me at ease by speaking kindly. And again, it has that word has said to it. You speaking kindly. And that really is what he's doing here. I mean, the power imbalance between the two people, Boaz and Ruth, is enormous. I mean, he's older for sure. He's richer. For sure. She's at the very bottom of the social scale. Not only is she desperately poor to where she's basically scrounging for food. This is the BC equivalent to dumpster diving, right? I mean, she's scrounging for food. She's just one step above homeless, and he has everything, and he says, I'm going to take care of you here. And so it really is hesed. He won't get anything out of it. There's no perk for him to be kind here. He's just doing it because he admires what she did. And you kind of see that, by the way, with hesed. When you show loyalty and kindness and mercy and compassion, when you show it, it does have an infectious quality. And not everybody will notice it. Some people will take advantage, but the people you most care about will notice it the right way, and it usually brings people around. Anyway, she gleaned in the field all till evening. She threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to an ephah. One of the parts that I skipped in this, for speed, Boaz had his men leave a little extra behind. Do a bad job, he told his guys. Leave more grain than normal. And so this ephah here is about 20 pounds of grain. Her mother-in-law says, "Where did you glean today?" Because mother-in-law knows this. I mean, there's no way there's no way you got this much. And he tells her, "Well, the man I worked for was Boaz." Well, Naomi's gears start to turn. The Lord bless him, she said. He's stopped showing his kindness, his hesed, to the living and to the dead. And she added, he's a close relative. And that levirate marriage thing I told you about earlier, I mean, he might be somebody. And so she's thinking about this. And in fact, one day, it mentions that she harvests, she gleans the whole season. So there's like 7 or 8 weeks of gleaning here that goes by between chapter 2 and then now here we are in chapter 3. So one day, after 7 or 8 weeks, Ruth's mother-in-law says, "Hey, I've got to find a home for you." So Naomi's starting to change here. Just 8 weeks ago, she's so depressed she can't even get out of bed while Ruth goes out to work all day long. Now, Naomi's starting to kind of come back to the living again. She's starting to be part of society again. And she says, "Daughter, I've got to find a home for you." Now, Boaz, with whose women you worked, he's a relative of ours. And tonight he'll be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. So she says, "Wash and put on perfume and get dressed in your best clothes and then go down to the threshing floor. But don't let him know you're there till he's finished eating and drinking." And almost for sure there's a drunken idea here. Let him get a little bit in him, Let's let him get to where he's not making clear decisions, if you know what I'm talking about. And when he lies down, note the place where he's lying and then go uncover his feet and you lie down there too. And there's some people who think the uncovering feet is a sexual thing, and I don't think so. I think it's more just let him wake up kind of quiet without shaking him to wake him up. It's a colder night. Let him cover his feet. He'll wake up here in a minute, and there you'll be, right? I think that's all it is. But there's certainly some sexual tension in this thing as far as like a Bible story goes. I mean, he's been drinking a little bit and find a place where he's all by himself, and that's what she does. When he was eating and drinking and in good spirits, she went down to the far end, where nobody's at, and you lay down there with him, uncover his feet, and she lays down. In the middle of the night, something startled him. He turned, and there's a woman lying at his feet. And Ruth has taken fantastic risk in all of this stuff. The whole thing's kind of curious. In that day, and really still in our day, on this, for whatever reason, it seems like men most of the time are the ones who propose to women. I know that's not always the truth, and it's certainly not a law, but it seems like that's most of the time what happens. Most of the time men initiate with women, but that's not what happens here. Ruth takes all the initiation. And so it's possible that Boaz, who is rich and who has a lot, might look at this beggar woman and say, "If I get married, it's not going to be to you." And we don't really know what she looked like, and we don't really know. We know he admires her character at times. He's talked about that, We know he admires, but it would be very easy for him just to reject her out of hand. It would be very easy for him to take advantage of her. She has no rights. He could blame the wine. He could blame the quietness of it. She seduced, she trapped me. And no one's going to believe her on that at all. We don't know what he'll do. "Who are you?" he says. "I'm your servant Ruth," she says. And then she uses this language that we talked about earlier. "Spread the corner of your garment over me." So she's telling Boaz, you could be the answer to the prayer you prayed earlier. When you were praying that God would do that, you can be the answer to that. And really, normally that's how God does work. He uses us to be his hands and feet. And so she says, it's a marriage proposal. That's what this is. This whole section here. It's a marriage proposal. And it really is. I mean, she's as far out on a limb as she can be. She has no power at all here. He has all the power. And who knows what will happen next. But he's thrilled. The Lord bless you, my daughter. The kindness that you've shown today is greater than what's earlier. You've not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And you kind of get from that whole phrasing there, this may be why Boaz hasn't really making a move. He's older than her, and he assumes that she'll want to be with someone closer to her age. And so he admires her, and he thinks she's awesome, but he's not really, maybe that's why he never said anything. That'd be my guess. He says, now, daughter, don't be afraid. I'll do everything you ask. All the people in town know you're a woman of noble character. And though it's true I'm a guardian redeemer of our family, the next relative, there's another who's more closely related than I. So let me see if he's willing, and as surely as the Lord lives, if he won't do it, I will. And he has her wait till morning. The next morning, he goes right down there to where the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along, and he says, come over here, friend, have a seat. They are mentioned, says friend here, the Hebrew actually is a so-and-so. It would be a better translation. It's almost like he's they're wanting to paint the other guy kind of as a villain. But come over here, you so-and-so, my friend. He says, sit down. And so Boaz took 10 elders of the town and said, hey, let's talk this out. So Boaz is wanting to have a legal conversation. So he gets the elders there, tells the guardian redeemer, Naomi, who has come back, is selling that piece of land, belonged to her relative Elimelech. But on the day you buy it, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, because you got to maintain the name of the dead with the property. And so at this, the guardian redeemer says, well, I can't do it then. Might endanger my own estate. Now, the law was the law. I mean, this guy, this so-and-so, what he's supposed to do is take her in. That's what the law says. But by this point, remember what I told you, the very first verse we read, this is when the judges ruled. And for the most part, people just did whatever they wanted. And so this guy says, I just can't take that risk, because this guy knows that whatever kid he has with Ruth, that kid is going to get the field. He's willing to buy the field if he can keep it, but he knows if he marries Ruth, then whatever kid he has, that kid's going to get the field, because the kid is still sickly's son, right, from the very beginning. Sickly, this kid will belong to that family name. And so I can't touch it. I want no part of it. And so Boaz told the elders, well, you're witnesses then that I'm doing it. I'm going to take all their stuff, and I've acquired Ruth the Moabite as my wife. You're witnesses, he says. And the elders and the people said, we're witnesses, and may the Lord make this woman like Rachel and Leah. They were the wives of Jacob, but they were the mothers of Israel, right? The ones who basically were the mothers of the whole nation, who built the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem, and may your family be like that of Perez. And that's that Perez and Tamar and Judah is that Genesis 38 story I told you earlier about, where all the stuff was going on. May your family be like that. It was an awful situation, but God eventually used it and blessed it. And so they called this blessing on him. And Boaz took Ruth and became his wife, and he made love to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. And the women said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord, who at this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. Right? So the guardian redeemer here for Naomi is this kid. I mean, you're not going to die poor. You're not going to die alone. You're not going to die abandoned. Maybe this kid will be famous all over Israel. He'll renew your life. He'll sustain you in your old age. As a grandpa, I can tell you it does have kind of that effect. For your daughter-in-law loves you, and she's better to you than 7 sons, which is just a fantastic thing in a real patriarchal society to say. And again, the thing that set her apart was she was just so loyal. You could count on her. I mean, no matter what the cost, if I commit to you, I'm going to go that direction. And the women living there said, Naomi has a son. And they named the son Obed. He was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of King David. It's my triadic crown. What's interesting about this, there's 2 or 3 things that are interesting. First of all, out of sickly or spent, we really don't know which one of the guys were with Ruth. I'm assuming sickly, but out of sickly comes King David eventually. And you may think that you've got nothing to offer, and you may think that you've got nothing to promote, but you have no idea how God might use you. And not only use you, but use your family. And maybe, I've talked about this before, Exodus chapter 20 talks about how the sins of a father will chase the sons for 3 or 4 generations, but a person who follows God will be blessed for 1,000 generations. And I've encouraged people in bad situations sometimes to imagine that, a couple of decades from now, maybe 5 or 6 decades from now, 7 or 8 decades from now, after you're long gone, 90, 100, 120 years from now, and people are sitting around and they're looking at old pictures, however they do that. Maybe they're just flipping through it with their mind pod, whatever. But they're flipping through old pictures of the family, and they see your picture as they're thinking about their family, and the old man in the room who's like your great grandson stops everybody and says, "Hey, listen, they're the ones who turned it around. Our family was a mess. I mean, our family was headed down such a bad path. But your great-great-great-grandma or grandpa, man, they got it. And they loved the Lord, and we as a family, and that's when the whole thing turned around." And if you come from a family that's kind of a mess, you really can't have that impact. I mean, Ruth did, and Ruth had nothing. And you who have more than nothing can certainly have that same effect. It just comes from being loyal to God. And with Naomi, too, who was completely empty and bitter, God was watching out for her. God was for her. And I believe in my heart of hearts that God is for you. And when you hold on tight to Him, God is going to see you through. And Naomi certainly would not have asked for the path that she went through. But at the end of it, she's grateful because Ruth, who was more valuable than 7 sons, was still with her at the end. It's a cool story. The whole thing's awesome. Let me pray with you, and then we're going to talk about a few more things. Dear Lord God, I thank you for this time. I thank you, God, for a chance to pray, and I just pray, God, that for whoever's watching, that you put your hand on them. Yeah. Hey.
We good? Yeah. Perfect. All right.
Okay.
So, hey everyone, we're gonna do our discussion portion. We have 5 questions.
But you don't have to go through all of them.
2 icebreakers.
Well, but
Were you
pick. Just
bored
pick.
this week?
Well, no, I did. Well, I'm afraid the one icebreaker may not work for every group. The first one. So I gave you 2 options. You don't have to use both icebreakers.
Sure, the first one. It says, have your parents ever tried to get you to date or like someone? How did that work out?
Yeah. Julia's parents actually tried to get me to like her. We were at camp, and I was eating the peach cobbler, and she says, "You like that peach cobbler?" I said, "It's really good." Julia made that, And, well, look, it worked out. That's what did it, the peach cobbler. So for me, it worked out.
When I think I was, I must have been a senior in high school, and my mom made tamales for the youth group for a fundraiser, and we had our youth group and leaders come over, and we were making tamales together. And it's a lot of work. It was. We were probably there all day, working. We had movies playing in the background, but we were just working a lot. And at the end of the day, when they all left, my mom's like, "Who's that?" Take no offense to this, but we're all Mexican, so she's like, "Who's that white girl that was here?" And I'm like, "Well, her name's Brittany." She's like, "Oh, I like her."
There you go.
And then
So there you go.
Here we go.
So it worked out for you too.
Yeah.
There you go. So it meant, but I assume it probably doesn't work out for everybody. And so if there's any, don't feel like you got to embarrass anybody getting your story. But that was an icebreaker just to kind of get the ball rolling.
Yeah. Okay. Another icebreaker question is, and you guys can answer this, when you think about kindness, what person or example pops first into your mind? So think of the word kindness, and within your group discuss what person comes up to your mind quickly. Can you think of someone?
Well, there's
you don't have to use my name.
In our church, somebody whose name pops up in my mind pretty quick is a guy named Eric Easton. And Eric's one of those guys who, if you ask him to help with you, he says yes. And it doesn't really matter what kind of day he's had or where he's going or what's going on. Yep. He just wants to help. And I think that quality was kind of a Ruth quality there. And so, but then there's other guys like that who, truthfully, there's a lot of people in the church who, if I need anything and I ask them, they want to help. And that really is the quality. And I'm sure you'll have lots of ideas and thoughts and names.
Yeah. So now going through the questions of you put 4 questions, 1 per chapter, and the next one. The first one says, why did Naomi assume God was against her, and why did she encourage her daughters-in-law to go back home. Why do you think Ruth stuck with Naomi? Now, can you answer this without answering it for everyone so that they can just be like, oh, Jeff already said it?
Well, the most interesting of those questions is the last one to me, because the Bible doesn't tell you. So whatever you say here is going to be kind of a guess. Why would Ruth stay there with Naomi? Because when Orpah leaves, I mean, the Bible doesn't really condemn her for that. That was the smart decision. I mean, it was a smart decision. This is like you've sold your house and you've got the check in your hand and somebody else asks you for it. You say, no, that's not wrong. It's your money. Keep it if you want to. I mean, that's just smart for you to keep your own money. But what Ruth does is intentionally choose what's going to be probably a life of poverty. And so why would she do it? That question, I think that is interesting. I mean, it has to be love at some level. It has to be, maybe she felt like she had done so much for her. I mean, I'm trying to think what kind of thing would inspire me to take a leap of faith like that? I guess that's kind of where I went with the question. I mean, what would it take for me to say I will willingly choose a life of abject poverty just because I owe it to this person? I'm trying to think what kind of person they would have had to be to me for I would do something like that. And that was the sense of the question. So I didn't really answer it, but I mean, that would be where I would want you to think through.
Right. Which kind of goes to the icebreaker question. It's maybe that person that we think is so kind to us, that type of person, maybe we would do something like that for. Right. But even then, that's a pretty crazy type of love.
Well, crazy is the right word. I mean, it's the kind of love that when Orpah's walking away and sees what Ruth does, she's just shaking her head. She doesn't feel bad about it. It's like, I don't know why she would do that. Right. Because it's way above and beyond. But anyway, that was it. That's the question.
The next question from chapter 2, how do Ruth and Boaz show their high character?
Well, I mean, he shows it by being generous to her. And you can dig into a lot of things there. Really, he doesn't owe her anything. The tradition says that Ruth was fantastically attractive. That's kind of been the Jewish tradition on this thing. And so maybe he notices her at a distance. But again, he is so much richer and so much more important and so much whatever. He can just make her his slave and get away with it. Right. There's just no reason for him to be nice other than he's just a high character dude. And he doesn't seem, he gets on the other guys are chasing after her and flirting with her, but he doesn't do that. You know, when he sees the other guys hooting after her and trying to touch her, he could do that too. And again, he would absolutely get away with it. Right. But he just doesn't think that way. So I'm not going to answer the other part, but that'd be my thing on Boaz. And there's more.
Oh, you haven't answered it yet?
That was it. The Boaz. Boaz. That's how Boaz is a high character. I didn't get into the Ruth thing. Okay. We can stop there. The questions are pretty self-explanatory. I don't know.
And we can, actually, we can, just to let them discuss. There is a few more questions. And the last one, just in case you don't have them, the last question that I will read is, what do you think are the main lessons of the book of Ruth? What do you think is one of the main things that you learned from the teaching, from the story, from learning about their character and who they were? What is one thing that stood out to you the most? Because maybe it's something different for you and your group, for you watching. Maybe we each took something differently out of it.
Well, so. and this goes to a little bit on that last one. I mean, the Bible covers a lot of history. I mean, the Old Testament covers, I mean, just in terms of what we know about, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 years. I mean, depending on how you look at that stretch before Noah to Adam and all that, I mean, it covers several thousand years. And you think about all the choices that people had to make about what stories do we think are most important for our people, for everybody to hear. And this slave woman's one of the top stories. I mean, it endured. And I mean, old Jewish men and old Jewish women said, our kids need to know about this. I mean, it's also, this is the kind of thing, because it's a picture of God. And it's a picture of how we're supposed to be. It's such a high standard that, I mean, I don't know if we ever can get there or not, but it really is a cool story. And it's one that you can fly right past and not notice.
And also, you pointed it out, the fact that through someone like her, you know, David came from that. Right. You know, and she was the great grandma or something like that. Right. I mean, and she hopefully maybe would have been alive. No, probably not.
Well, could have been.
Who knows? But I mean, just the fact that what you were saying is, it shows that, I mean, God is willing to use anyone. And if you know the timeline of the whole Bible and of the lineage of Jesus, there's so many people that screwed up royally that God still chose their family to, you know, bring good to other people. that stood out to me the most. I always am blown away by the timeline of the Bible.
Right.
You know, how Jesus was born through people that, you know, good thing I'm not God, because
Right. I would have done different.
I would,
Sure.
yeah.
Right.
So, okay. Well,
That's
anything
it.
else?
No, that's
Closing
That's
thoughts.
it. Hopefully you have a good discussion on all that. I covered too much again. Sorry about that. But hopefully you have enough time to talk about a few things and to really work that out. And we're pulling for you. This has been a great program for Gabe and I, and it's been neat to see so many people getting into their Bible and truthfully getting into the fellowship that really only can come when we're together. COVID has stolen that from all of us, and I'm happy that some people are getting together to watch this thing.
Yeah. So we thank you for joining us. We have our Sunday morning services if you want to join us in person or in the building. No, that's the same thing. In person or
Well,
online.
actually both, yeah, in person and in the building.
That's the same. You know, oh, you're teasing me. Okay. All right. Whatever. And we do this every Wednesday night. We do our Let's Talk things. We're trying to provide many ways for you guys to keep growing in the knowledge of God. So we thank you for tuning in for this. And what?
Nothing. No,
Relax.
go ahead. No, you're doing great.
See, when I know you're laughing, then I just get distracted. What is it?
No, nothing. No.
Now
In
I'm
person
all
or
riled up.
in person or
All
in
right.
the building.
Anyways, well, thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you next week.